Good evening, everyone. My name is Przybylski. I'm a game developer. Been in the industry now for 10 years and have a very unique place in that industry, having been both a indie game developer, entrepreneur, self-company starter, as well as a producer in the AAA space at making mobile games. So the presentation I'm about to give today is called The Crucial Threes of Building the Video Game Empire. It's named that for a couple of reasons. The first, the three part, I believe that information comes easily when it comes in threes. You know, it's the 1, 2, 3 punch. So I try to kind of break things up that way to help tell the story, keep things moving. And the second part, Video Game Empire, just the aspiration that I have is to make a mark in the world, do something big. So empire just sounded right. But the real, more humble part, and that's really just the sales pitch to you guys at the door, is it's about the internalized process. Basically, the emotional, the successes, the failures, what I've gone through in the last decade, and what I've learned from my experience working as both an indie and a AAA games developer. So here's what we're going to cover. There we go. All right, so first part of this is going to be what I call navigating the trials of Muse. This is speaking to the internal emotional experience of what it's like to be a game developer, at least how it was for me. How I succeeded as an indie developer and why I ultimately failed to sustain my indie business. And what I learned the past decade, bridging the gap between my learnings as an indie developer and as a AAA games developer. So I'm going to start off with a little story. Why this is not clicking. There we go. All right, so this picture here depicts the 9 Muses. Muses are a daughter of Zeus. In Greek mythology, they were said to inspire things like poetry, creativity, and I like that analogy a lot because it really speaks to the idea of this incessant voice speaking at the back here. There's something outside of you that's driving and bringing the creativity. For me, it was a little bit different. I pictured both a blessing and a curse. So the way I define a muse is an innate, primal drive, both a calling and a disease, which creates intense cerebral tension until released by the act of creation. It's a very long-winded approach, but what I'm trying to capture here is the part that, for creatives, and I'm sure many of you share these ambitions as we are all game developers, there's this intense desire to create, and that's what drives us. So I get up in the morning every day to make games. That's what motivates us. The disease part of it speaks to the part that doesn't shut up. It will wake you at odd hours of the night and say, hey, it would be great if your game had this in it. What, you should get to work and go do it. And so for that end part of it, I call it disease because it both inspires creativity, but it's that incessant force that can have a very destructive impact on your life. Let's run into that first. We're going to talk about what I call the 3 trials of the Muse. This is sort of the downward spiral that speaks to that negative suffering that inevitably leads. So we're going to start with the step 1. So you get inspired, you have this great idea like, hey, it'd be really cool if my game had multiplayer in it. It just needs that aspect to really connect to other players and tie this thing together. And you start thinking about that, and immediately, for myself, I get overwhelmed by the uncertainty of what I've now signed myself up for in terms of an objective. And the anxiety comes to that is my brain feeds itself with this lie. And that lie is, I can overcome an anxiety and take back control if I just work harder. Okay? So that level of thinking, just work harder, leads to step 2 in the spiral, sacrifice. And the sacrifice comes in the form primarily of time. So to give some context, on my indie game project, I spent just about 13,000 hours over the course of about 6 years. This was anywhere between 20 to 80 hours a week on top of a full-time job. So given week, 80 hours plus 40 hours, 120, I mean, you're talking sleep, maybe getting 4 hours a night, was a good night. You're talking anything fun, personal, like playing video games for fun for myself, not happening anymore. You're talking moments with family, friends, yeah, forget about that. Work is important, I gotta get this stuff done. And that inevitably leads to the final part at the bottom of this deadly whirlpool, the suffering. Physical exhaustion. What your brain does after consistent weeks of 4 hours of sleep is what I call the cotton candy effect. It becomes this mush where you start to literally hallucinate things as we're going about it today. Mental exhaustion, delusion, tunnel vision. You get to a place where the work productivity becomes as ludicrous as sitting there for 2 hours in front of my laptop, flipping back arrows over the difference of 2 points of color change on a graphic. And my wife will come to me and say, "What are you doing? You've been here for 2 hours just going like this. Hey, do you like this brown or this brown? They look the same, go to bed." And the most costly part of this really is the relationships that are affected. The time spent in all these things, what you do to your body, you become this like decrepit old, I like to picture like those necromancers in fantasy movies, just like you're sitting there all night reading your magical stuff, you might start to just look and feel all miserable, and your wife's there, you neglected her. One of the most painful stories I had with this, so before my first son was born, I had a coworker, and he told me, he's like, "Ross, here's a piece of advice, always be prepared." And he looked at me and it's honest, I'm like, okay, that's great. He's like, because the moment that your baby comes will be when you least expect it. This was 6 weeks before I was expecting my first child. And I had been following my same pattern, working until crack of dawn, 4 hours of sleep. I come home that night, and I'm back to my same old game, and I talk to my wife, "Hey honey, when's dinner gonna be ready? What's dinner?" She's like, "I think my water just broke."
Oh my goodness.
So there I was, and I'm just like, "No, I can't be serious. Dude, I'm ready to dinner. Come on, stop it." Sure enough, an hour later, we were on our way to the hospital, and another 4 hours after that, my son was born, 6 weeks premature. Somehow I managed to muster up the strength to get through it, but it kind of hit the shocker, like, wow, I am really putting myself in a bad place here when the thing that is the most important is what I put last, and this incessant views is what I put before. So I just wanted to share that for context. I saved this slide last because every time I talk about these slides up, I start tearing up. This is my son Wesley when he was born. This was just the day we finally got to take him home after being at the NICU for a good month or so. And this is him a little later holding the iPad, playing games. All right, so now I'm going to move into how to survive the trials. A much more peaceful, serene scene of these sailboats here. All right, so back to the 3 steps, the crucial 3s. Step 1, act, not speak, not worry. And what I want to kind of suggest here in terms of steps, what I found is that whenever I would think about what I wanted to do and dwell on that thinking, that's what surfaced the anxiety and led to that false feeling that I could take back control by working harder. When I actually took actions and just said, "You know what, I'm going to do this," and took a step towards start doing those things, I learned that what at first seemed like an impossible thing started to become a more plausible thing I could accomplish. And that kind of really feeds into the second part, which was take one step at a time. So my key objective, like a multiplayer thing that I said at the beginning, was a really hard objective I had come into. What I did there was start with what technology can I use? What existing things are out there that people have done? Is there a Hello World program I can do? And sure enough, started with those steps, took really simple things to build a simple connection, and not surprisingly, after a good 6 weeks, had it actually a connection up and running, was able to move some pieces around and play a multiplayer game. It was pretty cool. And it was that first step that really kind of fueled that journey and enabled me to see the sense that this wasn't a hopeless, over-anxious thing. It could actually work at a reasonable pace, not staying up till 4 in the morning every day. And the last step that really kind of speaks to that final downward spiral is the giving and renewing. So taking time to recognize when I was overdoing it, spend time with my wife, spend time with my friends, see family, But there's also this piece of giving back, which, one of the key reasons I come to talks like this is to really kind of share that experience, get back to others, make those connections with other people. So it's not just this thing you're doing by yourself, kind of internalizing. And I want to kind of keep that point to heart. I'm going to come back to it as I kind of talk to the successes and why that giving part has really fueled and made a massive impact in my life and as it can move forward. So now we're going to shift gears, and I'm going to move into the project I started and talk to some of the successes in that project. So the game I created is called Hero Mages. My original aspiration was to be a board game designer. I'm a big fan of tabletop, collectible card games, and originally this was incepted as a way to resolve it takes 4 hours to play Warhammer, the rulebook's 80 pages long, and everybody fights about the measuring sticks. So this game was created as a way to kind of get a nice experience together where people could come for game night, play the game, and discovered it was actually pretty fun. And eventually, after exploring the route of publishing as a board game and realizing it was a very risky venture to try and do all that manufacturing, a friend suggested why not produce it as a game. And so I explored that, and that leads to kind of the first really big success, which was all the technical accomplishments that came out of this. So I had worked as a software developer, but nothing as intensive as a game. And some of the things that came out of this were one of the first cross-platform multiplayer games ever published on mobile. So it's got asynchronous, real-time multiplayer on iPads, on phones. Big accomplishment back in the early days of mobile when we're still running iPad ones. The second piece, the industry recognition that came with it. So, kind of having a lot of those high-end accomplishments, folks like Adobe that were interested in pushing out their cross-platform tech were looking for people that could speak to sort of, how to make these things work on lower GPU devices, and so naturally got recognition from them. And then when the game launched on mobile, got featured by Apple, Google, Sony, Amazon, all the major App Store publishers featured the game, which, again, for a first-time indie was a massively huge success. The game had over 350,000 installs, and also won Technical Excellence and Semi-Design Finalist for Best Design. This last one, however, all those things aside, which are all really cool things, right? The impact the game made is really what I consider to be the true accomplishment of this project, aside from those other things. So let's talk about this in a couple of different stories. The first, across all the multiplayer games, 72,000 hours of multiplayer games, at least the ones I could track. Over 20,000 registered players. One of the best moments or examples of that was a moment I had where I was playing a game with people from 4 continents. So I had a guy from the UK, a guy from South America, Brazil, and Australia. Somehow all this, it was like 4 in the morning for one of those guys, but we were all playing this game together, and we were all talking, and everyone's just having a great time, like they're playing a game of D&D online, it's just like, this is really cool. We have all these, I'm like, where are you from? Where are you from? And we realized we're all across the globe, and it was this moment that hit me like, wow, I have bridged continents. People have come together to enjoy this experience and are connected throughout the world over this thing I created. That was a pretty cool thing. So another impact, this art that you see here. So interesting story. When I first launched the game, I attended Gen Con, which is a big board game convention out in Indianapolis, and met some of the first players there. And the guy that actually illustrated this turned out to be one of the first players that demoed the game. He's like, this is a really cool game. And later we bridged a connection. He ended up doing some free artwork for the game that ended up becoming my exclusive character I give whenever people have tech problems with the game. I was like, here's this code for this character. It's this Minotaur. It's really cool. And at some point, we were going to actually, a company had contracted to do the board game for it. And he actually did all the artwork for that. And actually later ended up doing a lot of work for me as an artist at my day job as well. It's another kind of neat story about a connection that was made as a result of this work, and creating an impact in someone's life. And then I've got this great story. So this is world champ James. He's a really cool, one of my top players, and he's got a really interesting story. So he started playing Here are images back in 2011. He was 13 years old at the time. He's 18 today, still playing. So just about 5 years now of playtime. He has played over 2,000 hours, 7,633 games. He has rolled over 64,000 dice, has a 3-win loss ratio. He's made over 30 friends in the game over the course of those 5 years. And he's got his entire family plays. He's got brother, sister, they all play together. When he first started playing, his mom wouldn't let him buy the expansions digitally, so he sent me a physical money order for the expansions. I still have it to this day. So, in terms of impact, this is why I make games. This is what I mean by building an empire. This is why I give them away. It's this notion of making those connections and impacting people that inspires me. So, oh yes, this story. I added this on yesterday. So synchronicity. This is a term. Does anyone know what this term means? All right. Get to about it. It's a term that means meaningful coincidences. It was first conceived by a psychologist named Carl Jung in the 1950s. It's widely more popular now in New Age philosophy books. If anyone's heard of like the Celestial Prophecy, they talk a lot about this concept of synchronicity. So the basic concept is that throughout your life, you will enact actions. And those actions, when you're doing what is meant for your purpose, will bridge connections and create things of meaning and purpose in your life that drive your destiny forward. And it was an interesting story because this kind of bridges an interesting part where what this game became and where I see the path of these actions taking led to greater things. So the question I have for the synchronicity part is, what does an indie board game have in common with helping educate high school kids about the dangers of heroin? This is a really weird story, so let me kind of give some context. When I first started doing the whole indie developer thing, it was all like, I called it like I was a developer in the closet. I thought everything had to be my secret. Nobody else was figuring this stuff out. It was like all this magic stuff I was doing, I kept it on myself. It drove me mad. One day I finally decided, I've got to get out there and bridge connections with other developers. So I went to the Flash Game Summit in San Francisco. When I was there, I started meeting other people. Some of those folks were the people from Adobe. And I started realizing a different philosophy about how to approach things. Typically people have this notion that everything about games is you keep it secret, you lock it down, which if you're in a AAA space is still pretty true. But as an indie, connecting with other people, I found that the real secret is give as much as you can. Don't keep anything secret. Tell everyone everything. And it seems like a weird paradox, but what I started doing was saying, instead of trying to ask everybody like, hey, here's my game, isn't it cool? I started shifting my perspective to, what are you struggling with? What things would help you? And then I thought, what have I done in my experience that would help others? And so I started volunteering to do these articles and writing tech things that kind of spoke to some of the problems I was solving that many others who were now moving to this platform were encountering as well. How to render the GPU faster, how to get something other than 2 frames per second on an iPad, as examples. And after doing those talks, I realized like this is actually really rewarding. I feel good about giving these things back. And so my next goal was I really wanted to speak at the Flash Game Summit. And I talked to the coordinator. He's like, well, what experience do you have? Well, none, I guess. But I've got, all right, you need to get some experience. So, not wanting to give up, the next step I had was, all right, well, I want to get some experience, so I'm going to go back to my college, I guess, and arrange a talk there. They'll love me speaking something. So work with my faculty, professors there, and I had been alum now for about 5 years. So they were excited, like, see me again. All right, yeah, we'll get something together. So somehow they put it down on paper, and like 100 people showed up to this thing, and I'm just like, wow. Gave this great talk about it. At the end of the presentation, amongst the people that came up to ask questions, one man came up and said, you are just the person I need to talk to. He hands me his business card and says, call me. So the next day I called this guy. Turns out that he was a technical consultant representing a nonprofit organization called Robert Crown. And they were working on a new project whereby they were trying to raise awareness about the problem of heroin in the community. So back in Chicago, Illinois, where I come from, heroin is one of the top causes of teenage death. It's a very strongly addictive drug. A lot of kids were getting into it. There was a lot of deaths overdosing on this drug. And so their initiative was to work with one of their folks that had gone through this experience, actually been addicted and was a recovery addict. And they were working on a project to create a digital game that would speak to the high school kids in a way that traditional methods wouldn't. And so they were looking for someone that had both game experience and e-learning experience. And of course, my background that I kind of presented back then was e-learning development. So this led to a relationship that then triggered the development of this interactive game, which is now used throughout high schools in this program to educate kids in an interactive fashion. Why not use kids? So one of the interesting synchronicities, that same story extends actually to my journey here. The reason I came to Utah was not because I made this indie game, but because I did this work for Adobe doing these articles. It was all free service, just getting the word out there to help, and just having that notion on my resume connected me to a recruiter at EA. They called me up and said, we need tech people that know this stuff to manage some engineers, and that's why I'm in Utah today. So just kind of goes back to that giving, renewing point I mentioned earlier, and how that kind of helps to overcome the trials. It also is the catalyst that drives life forward and can lead to meaningful things. So that's the synchronicity story. All right. So now the failure part. This awesome Getty Google stock image. Kind of looked like me. I was like, yeah. Why did I fail? Why am I not still an indie developer? I guess technically I still run the game, but why am I not doing that today as my day job? So really three things. No plan to acquire no users. This is the acquisition. No real monetization strategy, business. And no long-term player progression. So inherently, remember, the game I was describing was designed as a board game. And I took it digital without any force and the implications of what does it mean when this game goes digital? Bad question. My primary driver as the indie was the art and the creative I was trying to deliver, not focusing on the long-term sustainability of what it would take to actually continue producing the game. So that was the failure number one. The user acquisition was also a big one. So despite having incredible luck in getting feature placement, which is probably unheard of nowadays for a lot of indies, it's incredibly hard to do that. Of the 5,000, 10,000 plus games we're getting now a day in the review store, did not have a plan to continue that. So while I had an initial spike of acquisition, like most indie devs in the market, my install curve looked like a big spike followed by a downward flat line. And then the heartbeat just kind of stopped. There's a couple trickles here and there, but that's what happened. So no users meant no community, meant no critical mass, meant a multiplayer game without multiplayer people that would play was a real problem. All those things aside, if I had solved this one problem here, I might still be doing indie today. So I have players now that have, like James that we met earlier, that have been playing for the last 4 years. Incredible retention, highly addicted to the game. They cap their spending out at $9. So game has a premium spend if you want to get the offline mode. It's free to play if you want to get the game without that. And then there's 2 expansions that each cost $2. So for a person that's playing 4.5 years for $9, that's a pretty good, that's a quality dollar of entertainment, but a very bad lack of oversight on my part. So that is why I failed. All right, so now I'm going to shift gears again, and this is going to speak to what I've now learned, bridging the gap as a AAA developer. So we're going to start with this image here, because I think it's a great analogy to describe the differences between what it's like as an indie and what it's like as a AAA. Now, before I go into this, let me just caveat something very important. When I use the Death Star as analogy, it's not to say the Death Star is bad, evil, or a corrupt corporation. Okay? It's to say that the Death Star is awesome, the Empire is cool, and the super laser can blow up stuff, and that's awesome. Okay, so just to be clear of the context. All right, so not surprisingly. AAA, and the little X-Wing is the indie. All right, now before I get to the fun of talking about the Death Star and the Star Wars, we need one more analogy, key piece, so we need a rating scale of which to make these comparisons. So we're going to talk about another analogy. You guys are going to love this. All right. Does anybody know what this symbol is?
Zelda? Triforce.
Triforce. Yes, Ryan. Triforce. Now, before we get any disputes about the colors, because I know people are going to have complaints about these two, I abide by the 80s Zelda comics, in which case, courage is blue. Anyway, so wisdom, power, courage. The Triforce, they say that he who holds a Triforce, controls all of destiny, can make wishes, has all the power, that kind of great stuff. But it's a balance of these key three things that leads to that successful embodiment of destiny, right? So I'm going to parallel these with another triangle, known as the AM triangle. Acquisition, monetization, and engagement. These are the three things you need if you want to succeed in the video game business. So we're going to use this as our rating card. Okay, so the Death Star, the Empire, the AAA. This, again, all personal opinion, but where I perceive the absolute strength of AAA is undoubtedly its ability to acquire users. This is the Death Star super laser. When we talk about the ability of a AAA to just reach people, they've got millions of connected users across their existing titles. They've got a marketing team that is just unheard of, like a team of experts that specialize in doing nothing but reaching the target consumer. And when AAA turns on the fire hose to acquire users, it is that kind of power. So undoubtedly, the greatest reach they have. Secondly, monetization. So just like their marketing team, they've got this awesome team of analysts, data people, business folks that can disseminate, rip apart, find every key feature that's out there game today, do all this analysis on them and tell you exactly what things you need to do to monetize in that game. Here's the features that succeed if you want to monetize. Here's the things that we need to do to get our users to spend more. Here's how we can tune it in such a way that we can make an extra $1 million on this day here if we do all it. It's incredible. Now, engagement. Once again, caveat this. AAA is not a heartless corporation. They have a genuinely passionate, awesome team of designers that want to make and create things in the same sense that indies do. The only reason I view them here is relative to how big this is. So it's a measurement relativistically to acquisition and monetization. The other key piece that hinders the engagement in contrast to an indie is that AAA is averse to risk because they have stockholders, shareholders. They need to maintain predictability and success, and that success has to come from known variables. So when we look at making games, it's what is the competition doing, what does the market have today, and it's not how do we create a totally different thing that no one's ever thought of. It's how do we take that and tweak it and make it way better and then smash it with this thing. That's the strategy, right? Very different approach to making games. Indies, not surprisingly, are at their absolute weakest in acquisition. Is a complete lack of, or just no foresight there. I mean, realistically, when we think about, at least from my perspective as an indie, again, my number one goal was reaching the customers, creation, innovation, that Muse insistently saying, this is the thing that's awesome, this is the thing I want to play, this is the thing I want people playing. The opportunity and the strength there is in that ability to move fast, you're maneuverable, you're not attached to the strength of the shareholders. If you fail, you're not dragging down 1,000 people with you. So naturally, that's where the indie declined. If you're an indie that has any kind of foresight in terms of your longevity, you will have, this is your next marker, monetization. So you're going to be thinking, yeah, I want to make money, I'm not greedy, I'll sell the title for something, I'll put it up on Steam, we'll get $10 for that sale. So you're thinking about it, but you're not, again, necessarily thinking about the full broad plan. To be fair, I had a plan. I said, I'm going to monetize. I'll sell some expansion packs, a couple bucks each, but $9 over 5 years. Was not thinking long-term about the customers and the acquisition. I got them here, hooked, right? 5 years on a mobile game is pretty awesome. I lost them here. I was thinking about it, but not enough. Acquisition, complete. Just didn't even think about it. It was in terms of development, design, priorities, getting the game out there, then thinking about the money. This was just not thought of at all. And it's probably the hardest problem as we need to consider because this, if it's not solved, it doesn't matter how good this is, right? That field of dreams notion, if you build it, will come. I mean, I got lucky getting featured. But it takes more than a good game to get there. You have to have a plan. So, next step. The question is, how do I balance the Triforce? So, my design, my marketing, and my business mindsets must align to meet the needs of the customer. And to understand how you meet the needs of the customer, you have to ask, what is motivating my players? Okay, so now we're getting into fun psychology stuff. Has anyone here heard of self-determination theory? Oh yeah, come on, geek it out. All right, so self-determination theory of motivation is a psychological theory. I forget when it started, the 60s or 70s. I forget the people involved, but this is becoming very popular in game development, especially in the AAA space. And the basic premise of self-determination theory is this. Beyond the basic human needs for survival, so food is met, I have shelter, every human being is primarily motivated by three core principles. And these principles are competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So let's dive into each one. Competence is the principle that speaks to your ability to master skills and abilities. You feel motivated, or people feel motivated, when they can go into work and say, I know what I'm doing in my job. I do well at my job. I like my job because I do well at it. If you're good at sports, you tend to like sports. It's that competence of skill, the ability to master something. The reason that many of us like to play video games is because we are good at them. We understand things and we have an edge with people who are not good at video games. That is what competence is. Autonomy speaks to the freedom of choices. What I mean by that is that players or people need to have a way to choose a path that is innately theirs in their life. And it's an important need because when you're told to do something or you're given a path, your creative expression, your inner muse that's driving you to express and identify who you are is highly driven by the choices that you make for yourself. Now, autonomy does not necessarily mean to be that you have an open world or you have unlimited choices. So for an example, a game like Skyrim would be considered one very high in autonomy. A full open world, lots of choices, you can do any career you want. But a game like The Last of Us could also be said to have a lot of autonomy, even though it's a linear path story. And the reason is this notion of volition. Volition is the choice you would make is the one that you would make. And so the argument for autonomy in a game like The Last of Us is that the path you would take is the one that you would naturally choose. Or at least that's what we're told. Relatedness is the notion that people, or you as an individual, matters to those around you. So, in other words, you go into work, you go into your family, what makes you feel connected and related is that your actions, your choices, your present matters to those around you. That if you were taken out of the equation, people would be at a lesser state because you're out there. That core need is what it is next. So, these three things in mind as to what's motivating our players, let's now speak to how we can align that notion of what's going on in the player's mindset to these three things and how we can connect dots to make that video game empire. All right. So let's talk about the monetization first. All right. Let me get my yes. All right. So monetization on the business side. The three key questions. Does my purchase add value? All right. So when I speak to value, I'm meaning a few things here. So number one, the purchases are not the resolution of what we call a pinch. Players need to associate a value with the purchase. And value is defined as something that increases a player's proficiency, expression, or direct actions driving their satisfaction. Okay? So if you think about that in context of a game, if you play like a free-to-play title, for example, things that would lead you to feel like a pinch would be something where the game's difficulty is tuned so high that the only way you can get past it is if you spend money. Or the only way you can do something meaningful in that game, to get past those blockers is if you spend that creates a negative association where you're saying that the pinch or the money, the expenditure, is a way to unblock this negative aggression I'm feeling because this game is not giving me what I want. The right way to think about it to align with those needs is giving the player something that allows them to connect back with their core needs. So if the value is something that increases my ability to do something more effectively, if you're playing Hearthstone, for example, and your deck is all geared at freezing people, and you have this awesome Blizzard spell you haven't gotten yet, and you have that in front of you, the chance to get that, that's something that adds value because it speaks directly to your competence. It speaks to your choice because you chose to make the deck that's got it in there, and you want to get that card. Not necessarily a good example for relatedness, but relatedness would be one where, so different game, go to like a Clash of Clans. Why do people spend in that game? Primarily, for most players that are veterans, it's because they want to support their guild. There's a sense of connection. They're not doing it as a way to get past pinches, they're doing it as a way because their presence in that guild and their contributions are making meaningful connections that lead their group to victory for purchase. The other piece, do you purchase and connect seamlessly, intuitively with the player progression? So intuitively means that the purchase feels organic with the experience created, which means it doesn't feel forced, it feels natural. So things like, this is why timers in games, like free-to-play games became popular, because time was something that people could naturally associate with like hay, for example. Crops take time to grow. It makes sense that they take time to grow. If you put a timer on something that doesn't feel like it needs a timer, it doesn't make a lot of sense, people get aggravated. So that's kind of what I mean by the intuitive part. Seamlessly means that the purchaser is introduced timely, so not too soon in the experience before the player can perceive the value. A lot of games will push heavily toward, this really arbitrary thing where the first time experience is, isn't it great to purchase this thing here? But I don't even know what that thing is yet, but I'm getting told to spend gems on it, right? So the timing is important. You want to introduce the spending points at a place in which player has perceived the value, recognize that this is something that they want, and then show them, oh, by the way, we offer a way to get that more of it if that's something you want. All right, let's move to the acquisition part. All right, acquisition speaks to the fantasy I'm selling. So this is the key part that helps overcome that gap. When we think about games, again, from the indie perspective, it's primarily, this game would be awesome, all right? The very rare question that's not asked is, what is exactly that I'm trying to do with this? What is the fantasy I'm selling to a player? So if the game is about being the most badass wizard, that's the fantasy, right? This game is about being the most badass. It's about being the conqueror of Rome and decimating your enemies. It's about whatever that fantasy is. We have to ask, what is it I'm selling? Not just the cool mechanics. It's got cards. It's got dice. It's got platform jumping, right? It's the fantasy. What's the cerebral part at the top surface that's going to be your marketing point for how you're going to get to those consumers? Because as cool as the mechanics are that we come up with, and that's probably my favorite part, is the mechanical design. I like to get in there and this just feels cool. It is incredibly hard to tell people externally from yourself or those that can immediately play test it, this is cool. You have to sell that fantasy, the package, the wrapper, so to speak. Who does the fantasy appeal to, number 2? So this is really getting at identifying your target demographic. So if your game is about decimating your foes, slaughtering poor innocents, I don't know where I'm going with this violence speak tonight. It just seems like the kind of audience that would appreciate it. You want to be thinking, probably want to go 28-year-old male. That's probably the right demographic of the type of, who plays the type of game that this fantasy typically appeals to. That's probably who you're targeting. And then you want to start to ask if this is a more niche game. Maybe this doesn't appeal to everybody. It's like a Japanese RPG game. What's the audience segment that plays that? How do I slice that even further to figure out what particular patterns they have? Is this a mobile player that plays it? I've encountered a lot of interesting things with this where I've talked to other developers and things like the Utah Game Wars, and people will develop games that are interesting. They'll have a game that's like a couch co-op game that's intended to be played, Xbox style brawl fighter, and then it'll be on Steam. And the next question is, well, who's got Steam hooked up on their couch with 4 controllers, right? So think about the fantasy I'm selling. Who does the fantasy appeal to? And then, what are the behavioral patterns they are? That's where you want to be thinking your targets. It's going to affect things like your development decisions, how you're going to reach those players. And then lastly, how do I deliver the message, right? So this speaks to, again, once you understand what the fantasy is, who the audience is, where they are, you can be creative about how the messaging works, right? There may be particular Reddits, Twitter groups, Facebook groups, maybe there's a particular forum, community website, maybe there's a certain magazine that's in common that all these people read. These are all interesting points you can use to get creative with your acquisition beyond just, I'll be featured on day one, getting millions of players. It's a great strategy for day one, but not so much after. All right, and then lastly, on the engagement side, we're looking at how does my product satisfy the needs? So again, when we talk about the needs are what's going on here, right? So we want to be thinking things like, what is it about my game that's going to lead to people feeling like they're getting mastered, right? So things like difficulty curves, how you're introducing the product up front, right? So initially you want to get people feeling like, hey, this is what this is about. I can do these things here. It's pretty easy. I get it. Great example of first-time user experience. One I really liked, opening a Hearthstone. Immediately when you come in that game, you have this sense of the fantasy being sold is you're a badass spell card wielding wizard. You come in that game, and the first thing you're doing is you're a badass wizard flinging cards at people, decimating your foes. But then you want to get over the sense of mastery, right? So they start throwing foes at you that are aggressively hard. You get through the first guys like a breeze, and they throw the druid, I forget the guy's name with the horse-looking half. You know what I'm talking about? That guy. And he just destroys you. And you're like, what the heck is this? Right? I need mastery. I need to come back and get this upgraded card, this upgraded deck, and I come back and beat him, right? I've got choices. I have these new cards I earned from my previous battles. Maybe I can try putting those into the game. What is new and innovative about the game? So you want to be looking at things like if you're competing with other people in the market space that have similar fantasies you're already competing with, what is it about the game that is unique to your game that you can sell to the consumer as a unique selling point? Maybe it's a new mechanic that hasn't been done in the game before. Maybe it's a new combination of mechanics that hasn't been experienced before. Does my experience separate from theme or brand drive meaningful behavior? So this is an interesting one, and I kind of reflect on this from the AAA space, where again, from a AAA sense, we typically start with brands and IP. Right? One of the awesome leveraging powers of the AAA space is we can get these great brands, get tons of use because people all recognize what those things are. They're all these awesome licensing or pre-existing internal brands. One of the key things I see as a challenge or area to innovate there is when we look at those brands and if we take that same game experience and rip the brand out of it, is it still fun? Is there still a connection? Are we still hitting on these three buckets of human needs to get there? And if we are, it's a good sign that there's a great game waiting to be had. So those are the three triangles, how we connect them back to those player needs. So to kind of tie this all together here, the closing statement I want to leave you all with is this. When I understand the motivations of myself, why I'm making this game, why am I doing this, what am I having to do, and the needs of my players, what's going on, what are their needs, I can effectively design the pillars of my product, my acquisition, my marketing, my monetization, my engagement, in harmony, and create a living empire. Thank you guys very much. Any questions I can answer for you?
One.
Yes. Sean.
Yeah. You went through the steps and at the end you had the give back for it. Roughly how long do you usually take you to go through a cycle of that?
Oh, where I come to the give back thing?
Yeah.
It varies. It's not a predictable cadence. There's a certain point at which I reach where I get a feeling like, all right, I'm starting to get in the weeds here. Usually my wife points it out. Usually says, you've been working a little hard, you need to take a break, you need to step away from these things you're playing with and start thinking about that. One of the sparkers for me recently was, it's weird too, it's kind of like in the same sense that the Muse tells you gotta do these things, there's like a anti-Muse that's like the, almost like the dark angel, the light angel. I was up at like 2 in the morning and I'm just like, I wonder what John Dean's up to. Went online, saw the Uden thing, I'm like, this seems pretty cool. I want to be part of that. It came to that, and then that kind of got me excited, and that's sort of what sparked my introduction to Josh. I met through the Uden, and it was just like, yeah, this is cool. I want to kind of keep doing these things. I'd say, if I were to like kind of put it back into, I'd say about every 6 months at a minimum, I typically come out and reach out. So I've done like talks like this for the Comic-Con group, is kind of the more recent ones, and then they go into the Udens and you guys. Yeah, I'd say about 6 months is typical. other questions.
Sure. So having done both, good job, having done both independent and AAA development now, and you're currently in AAA development, have you considered going back to indie development?
I'd say that thought is probably always in the back of my mind, yes.
It's always tempting.
It's always there. I mean, so I absolutely love my job. I love what I do. I love the team I work with. I love the work we're doing. There's always this innate need, though, where part of the creative process is the desire to create your own thing. So I'm always thinking about that. You know, what are things I would like to create if I could go do my own game, and you know, thinking about that relationship with my career and long term. So it's there. I'm not going to say it's not there, but yeah.
I have one more. Oh, touch on that.
Yeah.
So on acquisition, I think that there are some games that sell purely off of their mechanics, like N++ and perhaps Towerfall Ascension.
Yep.
But in any case, I think that, could you go into a bit more detail there on what questions you answer and how to break through the discoverability barrier? What your thoughts are?
Oh man, that's the hard ones. Yeah, so first I would say what I'm suggesting here in terms of a balanced Triforce is not that you can't have outlier successes, but I guess what I would suggest is that games like that, like a Towerfall, they're exceptions to a norm. Like those kind of successes can happen, but you're not hedging your bets in a way that sets you up for the best chance at success. So part I guess the challenge is like without some level of marketing connection or getting your game out there, or at least making an attempt to reach bloggers or people that do game reviews, the question I would ask is how does your game ever get surfaced, right? In the case of like a Towerfall, right, they had an opportunity at some point where they made a connection and it got distributed on the Sony store and the Ouya, I think is where they started.
Right.
So naturally that was their opportunity, right? There was this new tech coming out, nobody's on it, first one on it, and it was a selling point for them. So naturally when Ouya got big on their Kickstarter, the Towerfall went big with them, right? So they had that going beyond just the mechanic as well. So when I see like unique opportunities in terms of discoverability, it's thinking about those kind of questions I talked to, what the fantasy is, who you're selling to, and then what's the unique angle or opportunity you might achieve with it, right? And in the case of the Towerfall, they were Android platform, they had this great thing, it required the controller, and the Ouya presents an opportunity that would deliver it in a way that gave them their kind of flagship start with this. Yes?
Well, this is just bouncing off of your idea from what I've seen, but like with those type of games, something else is important to notice that there is a very specific market for hardcore types of games, especially applicable for N+.
Okay.
And so yeah, there's that type of community outreach, but there is a big hurdle with that, is that because that market is actually fairly saturated, extremely saturated, those controls have to be better and more refined than everyone else's, because and this is extremely noticeable, especially with when you try to play a N+ knockoff and you just can't make those horrible jumps.
Yeah.
And then Towerfall has a whole bunch of gears and mechanics working behind the scenes to make it seem fun, even though they're actually pulling all kinds of whistles, smoke and mirrors in order to cheat how you're actually playing it.
Yeah. What's your question?
Oh no, I'm just going.
Oh.
I'm just throwing my 2
Make sure I
cents on it.
don't miss it. No,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely, yeah. That kind of there was a couple of things you hit on there. One of them had to do with the unique mechanic, right? So coming up with a unique edge that your product has over the other competitors in triple space can set you apart. It has to be executed well. That was the second thing you stated, which is kind of a given, right? If you're going to put something out there that's competing with other people that have an established ground, the thing you put out there better be very well polished and have an exceptional user experience. Yes.
In a slightly pessimistic outlook, to do that though, you're basically trading money that would be spent on advertising into your engagement.
True.
And you just have to find a balance.
Yes, that's that balancing act of the triangle, right? You don't want to have your triangle like this and then you're falling on itself. You want that nice steady pyramid, right? It speaks to your strength though too. So part of, there's this other exercise I go through, which is you think about, as a developer, where your strengths tend to lie. And at least personally, I find that it helps to kind of pick the thing you're really good at and put most of your eggs in that basket, and then find creative ways or other people that can help bridge the gap in the things you're not as good at.
Please, one more question I had.
Yeah.
Have you actually promoted a game on a show floor, an expo floor?
Yes, I have.
Any thoughts on if it's good, bad, shouldn't do it, or?
So, yeah, actually I do have thoughts on that. I believe that the cost involved in doing trade showcasing is very expensive. And especially if you're going to be traveling on top of the trade show itself. So a typical trade show might run about $1,500 for a booth. You can sometimes get discounts for cheaper than that if you're a first timer or you bundle with somebody else or you're an indie. But that's typical cost for like a trade show. So I did a few of those different trade shows. You'll get a lot of people and a lot of initial interest, which, at least in my case, I mistook for time to quit the old job. I got all these customers lined up now, and there was no. In terms of long-term reach and like feasibility, I mean, it's a great initial, hit, but it dies off very quickly. So where I would lean more, if I was going to go out again, I would probably avoid the trade shows, reserve that cost for things like art production or targeted user marketing, areas where I could focus on getting very specific community of players into the game, and then trickle that over the course of time so I could have a continuous, sustained engagement of players influencing the game. The other key thing there is a lot of the benefit of the trade show aspect, where you're getting that face-to-face time, which is the part that really is valuable, especially as an indie, right? Nothing speaks higher for you as an indie than having a face-to-face with your customer. It's one of the biggest differences you can have as an X-Wing versus a Desta, right? That you can fly up and meet people as opposed to, hey, I'm the So that's key. Now, when I'd say to that, another innovative approach I would consider nowadays is the YouTube approach, right? Create a channel, do a spokesperson thing on your thing, get other people that are in that circle of people doing those things to help promote your product. Dollars and time spent there, I think, will pay higher dividends than the one-off face-to-face. Yes?
How early before releasing a game would you start the acquisition part? When you start marketing and bringing people onto your brand?
Oh, you're asking when should you start in the process?
Yeah, like how much before releasing your game would you start that process?
Yes, okay, that's a great question. So I would suggest the best time, so there's a couple parts to it, I guess. You want to first quantify, once you have your core design statement and what you're trying to do with the game determined, you want to test that against those questions. So you want to identify what's the fantasy, who am I selling to, and do some research to figure out who your demographic is. Because one of the sad things that you may discover is there's not a lot of people for this game. Or if there's not a lot of people for this game, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because maybe that's a unique opportunity, right? A small number of people that's untapped could be a hugely lucrative direction to go, but then you have to ask some questions about, all right, well, how do I laser in on those people, right? Understanding that audience size and who they are is going to influence everything about your production. Now, you want to get that first early on. In terms of actually putting dollars spent to it, I wouldn't suggest that until you're far enough along where you've got the game very close to launch. If you're going to do a soft launch in a territory, you might want to reserve some of that for getting initial test user base. So, if you're expecting 100,000 users, you maybe want to get 10,000 or less users to the initial run. You might put some spend there. So, but yeah, generally the actual dollar spend would be planned to go timely with the launch release.
Okay, and do you connect that with the self-determination theory of motivation in terms of keeping people around before the game actually launches?
Okay, yeah, so you're talking about different part of it, community building aspect of it. So if you're going for this is another interesting way to go, because I've seen a lot of companies succeed with this as well. One of the companies that I was really inspired by that kind of had a similar game to mine was a company called Seven Lights. They built a game called The Continuum that was like a collectible trading game. Anyway, they had up to about 1.5 years, 2 years prior to launch, they had built an entire forum site. They had 20,000 players registered on this forum. They weren't playing the game, they were like LARPing on the forums, I guess. That's where we describe it. That's what they were doing. They were giving the players stories, and they were enacting role-playing dialogue on the forums in anticipation of this game coming out. And it created this massive snowball community. So when the game did hit, they had 20,000 plus players. So that's another type of strategy you can go for in terms of if your goal is to
That's
build.
amazing.
That also gave the devs a good idea of what their audience was looking for. What's the fantasy that they're building in their head?
So they were focusing on the relatedness, right?
Yeah, the connection with those players. Yeah, bringing them together. It was a game about community, so that's what they built it. Yes, very good.
That's why beta releases are so popular right now, because of the free publicity community, free, and sometimes it's paid. You know, getting paid for early access.
Yeah. Oh man, Minecraft. That's right. That game. Yeah, you're gonna just go $10 to pay for the demo or the beta. That's gonna allow us to get all the data we need to. Oh man,
It's insane.
it's got $1.5 billion.
One of those things which is something which I keep running around in my head is something along those, the cognitive portion that you're talking about, was Easter eggs as
yeah.
a way of being a connectiveness with other people. Because if you leave it there, someone can then, and the proficiency as well, and they find it, can be like, oh right, I know that.
Yes.
And then they feel connected also to the other group who adds to the forum, and then you started.
May I take a guess, Sean? Are you a fan of Ready Player One? Never heard of it? Really? Oh,
I've
yeah,
heard
okay.
of it.
I just assumed that was a very astute observation. So Ready Player One, I highly recommend it. It's an awesome fantasy novel, but it's based on that premise of an Easter egg. And that Easter egg is what drives all the characters in that story together in this community. Yeah, that's a great example. Other questions or commentaries I can help? All right, well, thank you guys very much. You're a fantastic audience. It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Josh, for the opportunity. All right.
You want to
Kill that? Yeah. I'll edit all that out. Thanks. Hopefully that all worked.